Alright, now that we know how to open up images in Photoshop, we know how to resize and save. We looked at a few of the options with layers, and we looked at a couple of the tools. I want to just show you a few more things that I think will be really useful for the first project. Certainly not everything that you're going to actually want to be able to use, and really there are almost always a better way of doing these things, but these are some quick basic items that you'll probably use in the next week or so. Most of them are going to be adjustment layers, which is this black and white circle here, and in CS6 you have all of these options up here. But if we click on this, some of the ones that I tend to default to are curves, which I use to adjust the brightness and contrast of the image. There is a adjustment layer that says brightness and contrast, but this one gives you a lot more control. When you hit curves, it brings up this little mini histogram, and we have this line going through it. The idea with curves is that you would make a curve out of this line. You can bend it like this, a nice S-curve. So anytime you move the line below its original position, it's going to darken the image. Anytime you move it above, it's going to lighten the image. If you raise this part, which would be the lighter part of your histogram on the right, and lower this part, the darker part, you're going to increase the contrast. Now, quick tip for just starting out would be to hit the auto button, and it'll get you pretty close. The first thing that this round identified is that we weren't hitting anywhere near pure white, and you can just quickly slide over this bar right here to get to pure white, which is really what this should be. Now I can just reshape this to make this nice soft S-curve. Maybe the shadows don't need to be quite that dark. Highlights a little bit more. And I like it. You can put multiple points in here for really refining your curve. It's one of those things you just want to play with. Usually, if you're not sure about it, just make it subtle, and you can always just turn it on and off to see the changes that you've made. So, what else? We do have levels, which is effectively a really similar process. This is great for if you know you just want to quickly adjust this to hit white, which we already did in curves. But I can turn curves off, and you can see how that quickly lets me get pretty close. And I can adjust middle tones, but honestly I usually just end up using curves because I can do most everything that I can do in levels, but even more with curves. So we'll turn off levels, turn back on our curves. What else? Hue and saturation can be great or horrible because you can do this if you don't moderate your adjustments. You know, bumping most pictures more than 10, 12, we're going to really start to have some negative effects. Here we get some orangish spots on our skin, and her lips look out of control. For CS6 users, you have the awesome option of vibrance, which, as I've mentioned to you before, adjusts the intensity of the colors, but only affects maybe the more neutral or dull colors. It's not going to blow out her lips, her shirt, and her eyes quite as much as saturation would. So when I increase saturation, we get a little bit too much here. But if I do that with vibrance, it's nice. We're still increasing the color a little bit more, and I usually pair them up so I get it about where I want. You can get a lot more heavy-handed with vibrance than you can with saturation. What else? Sure, there's the black and white filter, which we've seen, which makes it black and white. You can control the values of individual colors, totally changing the picture. Photo filter we've looked at, and really I think that's a good basis for fixing most issues with your images. So the last thing I want to show you here, and I'll just show this in a really, I'll show you in a very clear sense and then also in a more subtle sense. So with the black and white filter, I can apply that. Okay, it's made the whole image black and white. By clicking on the black and white circle here, I bring the options window back up. But if I click on this right here, that's the layer mask thumbnail. So if you think of this layer as sitting 100% fully affecting the whole image on top of the image here on this layer, I can actually erase out some of that layer. I do that by using a black paintbrush. So let's pretend that the layer right now exists as a white surface, white being 100% existent. A pure black surface area there would be 100% non there. So as I paint with my black paintbrush, with this layer selected, I'm effectively removing the filter that exists there, or the layer that exists there. I can just switch this to the white now, and it's going back to the filter. So a more subtle, controlled version of this would be, let's say, my, do I have my hue and saturation? All right, my vibrance layer, where we made things two colored. I think maybe the lips are a little bit too saturated, but I really like the way the eyes look. So with this layer selected, I grab my black paintbrush. I'm going to make an adjustment up here. Rather than making this completely removing the vibrance layer with 100% opacity, I'm going to turn it down to maybe just 28. And also reduce the brush size. This way, I'm only going to be putting or removing maybe like, well, 28% of the layer in this area as I paint over it. It's just a little bit subtly reduced. Okay. Now, other things that I think will be helpful initially. As far as tools go, we've already kind of talked about the cropping tool and some other basic tools here. The clone stamp tool, once you get it to work, is really powerful. Let's use a magnifying glass to zoom in here. I'm going to remove this purple earring. Okay. With the clone stamp tool, I can replace one area of a photo with another part of the photo. Make sure you have the background selected because we're not trying to replace the part of vibrance that's over there. We're trying to replace the actual earring, which is on the background layer, the actual image. So when I click this, it comes up like this. Could not use the clone stamp tool because the area to clone has not been defined. Option click to define the source point. So I need to tell it where I want it to draw from when I'm replacing. So I hold Option and it switches to this little crosshair. I'm going to choose this area near where I'm going to replace so I get a good match for flesh tone and value. And every time I click, you can see the little X pops up. It's replacing the area where my brush is with wherever the X is coming up. Now you notice when I move up here, it's now using this other part of the dark value, which I don't want. So I'm going to need to hit Option again and change my source point so it's working with where I want to be drawing from. So I'm going to try and actually replace some of the shirt. Kind of have to be aware of where you're drawing from and where you're placing it. You can constantly change it as you go. Is that perfect? No, but this image is honestly really pretty small and pixelated. So you're not going to notice much anyways, especially when we go back to the original view. I think that might be probably all of the most critical pieces for these first couple assignments that people tend to want to adjust. Of course, at this point then I can do my image size and then my saving